Alright guys, what's going on? Needs more drums back in our city of Percusion for another episode. I am super excited to be back in this city. Haven't been, able to do a lot of building in this city, so it's nice to come back and, get a couple episodes in and yeah, make some good progress. So before we get started with what we want to do today, I actually want to show you something that I did off camera after I recorded the last episode. So I had a little bit of I wanted to detail up the central station, and I think that I like the way it turned out. I actually ended up using some of the new. So this is interesting. So what I did was added in, there's kind of this barrier here to kind of there was a weird space here, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And instead of doing the same thing on the other side, I decided to make sort of a grand entrance. And this is actually with buildings from the financial DLC. I just got them, used Find It to kind of find some ones that fit a little bit, and added this tall one here to kind of give sort of a little nice, this is like a centerpiece of the city, right? So we want to have a nice little areas so that people can, find it easily. And like back in the day, if this was, an old station, this probably would have been a prominent point in the downtown. So yeah, so preserving this kind of older style of architecture, I really like that, and then blended with sort of the more modern arches and everything. And this is something that I've seen in multiple cities is kind of building on old architecture. And so like even in like Chicago, for example, there's an old station, and you can tell it's kind of got its character, but the buildings around it are all very modern. So this is kind of a cool contrast between the old and the new. And I also kind of like what I ended up doing here. So this is the a couple of buildings from the Modern City Center content creator pack on the store page for City Skylines, and I ended up using this arch, which is actually a unique building. I think it's actually right here, City Arch. So yeah, came with the Park Life DLC, it looks like. But yeah, so I decided to kind of blend that in there because this space was just really weird and I didn't really know what to do with it. And yeah, and as you can see, we're actually laying the groundwork for some public transport that we don't have yet, but we will have very soon. So I put down a little compact bus station. This is from the pedestrian DLC. It's a really cool looking asset, and it actually fits very nicely into this space. And then this is our little metro stop. That's going to be kind of the central metro station for this part of the city. And the city's not very big, but I do want to have some sort of metro line. That's why I'm kind of not running the train over here. I figure I can kind of take the metro over this way, and maybe another line out over this way. So yeah, with that being said, I really like how this came together. It's kind of unique, and I like, all the food trucks and everything that I put here, and actually seeing people walk along this really kind of, brings it all to life. So yeah, just thought I'd spend some time doing that. It was really bugging me that there was just this really weird space, and now we have something, something kind of unique. And I wonder if I can even change some of these colors to make it look a little bit more. There we go. That's a little better. Kind of I like the white, similar to like the other buildings. The green's kind of weird, but it's cool. It's like a nice little grand entrance, so to speak. So yeah, this actually turned out really well, and I'm happy with it. So now I really want to work today on these spaces here. There's space on this side and the space on this side. So what I want to do is I want to make this is primarily going to be, I'm thinking residential, because, I assume this is going to kind of transform into the central business district around the central station and such. And so I wanted this to be primarily residential up here. And, we're not going to go super dense, because I don't want to have this really dense area and then abruptly to this farmland. But, something like maybe, these kinds of buildings here, and, we'll have some more denser buildings like maybe over here. But once we get back out to this rail line here, a little bit less density will be just fine. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to do is kind of lay out the grid. I'm not entirely sure of, where I want everything to go, but I do know that I kind of want to follow this grid here. I think this is kind of a cool, actually, you know what? Yeah, let's stick with that. That way we can carry this grid forward a little bit all the way out to here. So yeah, so let's go ahead and connect. We're gonna have to do some nifty things with the roads here, because there's kind of a lot of intersections already, and I don't want to make this too much of a traffic nightmare. So I think we're gonna have to, you know, kind of get creative with the way that we work around some of these intersections and such. Yeah, and to be fair, you know, these rail lines are not gonna make it any easier. This is, you know, gonna present a challenge of its own to try to fit, you know, certain buildings kind of in here. This is gonna be we'll see what we end up doing with some of these. I'm kind of curious how this is gonna turn out actually. And again, I don't want to make a connection there because that'll just make a lot of traffic. Let's go ahead and drag this out more towards the river. And I assume this will kind of be where we're going to transition to some, you know, really lower density, not lower density, but, you know, some smaller buildings here, but then keep stuff relatively tall out this way. All right, so I kind of like the way that grid is looking, and I know there might be yep, I figured there might be some pillars kind of in the way, so let's go ahead and like move this back a little bit. All right, now that's looking a lot better. Cool. So now we can kind of go through and let's see some of the buildings that we have. So I always like to go into to find it and just see, you know, what we have to work with. So I'm thinking, again, since this is going to be a little bit sort of between medium and high density, I don't want to go with anything, you know, super massive like this, because I feel like those buildings are going to be more over this way. But we can do something, maybe, you know, some things like this, or even some of this older architecture might be cool, kind of near the central station. I always like to combine sort of an old and new, and I think this actually might be commercial kind of along here where these between these rail lines here, because this is kind of a main road, and I don't really want, you know, people probably wouldn't really want to live on that main stretch there. But yeah, so let's try to see. I know there's actually some vanilla buildings that don't look too bad. Like I always like this one. I always like, let's just put some of these down and see kind of, you know, we can move them around and such. But yeah, like that's a good one. That's another pretty good one. Even some of them ones like this are not actually too bad for this area. Yeah, let's see what else kind of we have to work with here. This is another good one. I like that building a lot. Place this down somewhere. And I'd imagine this wouldn't be the most desirable place to live just because of all of the noise that would be coming from the trains. But you know what? It is what it is. And, you know, there would still probably be a lot of people that would want to live here just because of the proximity to the city. And you know, you'll probably get used to it, I'm sure. I know that in you know, Chicago and stuff, there's a lot of houses that are right next to the L line or whatever. And that's, you know, really, really loud, but people still live there because, you know, it's a nice spot to be. So can't complain. And yeah, I really like these assets here. You know, they're kind of nice. You can put them along the road and they look kind of nice and modern and really cool. So yeah, I really like those. And since we have quite a few of modern buildings here, I'd like to actually throw a couple of older residential buildings in this area as well. For example, like, you know, maybe right there. I have this old one too that's really kind of cool. This is sort of like a wall-to-wall type, but I think actually it's kind of not. But I wonder if I have some other ones too that might be a little bit older. Let me take a look. And I'm actually not quite sure what I want to do along this road here. I'm thinking of something maybe like maybe even some kind of bike path, you know, along that road, so that I don't have to worry about trying to fit in a bunch of buildings to develop when it couldn't, you know, if it might be hard to try to find something that fits. I know there's a lot of modern buildings in this area, but this is still kind of the city center, and so I think it would lend itself to being a bit more modern compared to some of the other parts of the residential areas, you know, close to the downtown. So these brick condos are another one that's really nice. You know, kind of not super dense, but a nice transition from the, you know, dense downtown buildings. I'd like to place down some commercial buildings kind of in this area too. Since this is kind of a main road, I figured that there would be some commercial kind of along, you know, closer to the tracks, closer to the more busy areas of the downtown. And I'm trying to figure out what building I could put right in this area here. So I already have that over there. I can just use this and make it like a different color. And then maybe something a little bit smaller. I think I know which one would actually look good there. I know it's kind of close to the tracks, but I think that will work. Yeah, so I think that's kind of a nice combination of buildings there. You know, it doesn't, the height kind of progressively gets a little bit lower. And so now, you know, it is time to kind of jump in and detail this up. So I think this is where we're going to jump into a quick time lapse and just, yeah, see what we can do to make this place really kind of come alive, as I always say. All right, so the first thing that I wanted to do after we place down all the buildings is kind of go back through and, you know, make some of these roads a little bit more unique, give them a little bit more character. Since this is a residential area, I always like to put down a lot of tree-lined roads, or, you know, the medians with the trees in the middle. You know, I think it just helps give that really residential kind of more peaceful, you know, type of neighborhood, a little bit more quiet. I know a lot of times in bigger cities, tree-lined streets are very, very important, especially now that people are realizing that tree-lined streets actually have a lot of other benefits, as opposed to just, you know, I mean, they look nice for one, but they actually make people feel safer when they're walking on the sidewalks and everything. And they actually do help with noise pollution in the game as well. So, you know, placing down those tree-lined streets is actually not just for aesthetics, there's actually a functional purpose. And so another thing too that I like to do, kind of my main mission for this type of build is always, you know, my go-to things are parking lots, trees, and fences, because I feel like adding those things into these areas kind of, they're little things that don't take a long time to add, and they really transform an area. I mean, just like you'll see before and after, well, and pathways too. I like to add, you know, like pathways like I'm doing now, but you'll see, but you know, before and after, just how much it really changes the whole feel of this area just by adding those simple things. And to be honest, like I said, they really don't take that long to add. And I think a lot of times, you know, I've said this before, is that it's really easy to get caught up in the details when you're building a big part of the city like this. Like, you know, this is, granted, it's only a few blocks, but like this is kind of a significant project. And I think that even with the amount of detail that I added, it still took me about, I don't know, I want to say like half hour, 40 minutes or so to detail up this whole area. And, you know, since the time lapse is only about 15 or 20 minutes, it kind of makes sense. So yeah, it takes a bit, but you know, people spend hours and hours and hours detailing up an area of this size. So, you know, honestly, I'm pretty happy with this. And yeah, so along the riverside, this is something that I really like to have some trees and some pathways, especially because you know, people actually walk on this key. And you notice that just a while ago, I plopped down some palm trees, which is something that I haven't done yet in this city. And, you know, I mean, it is by the water, so I feel like palm trees are totally appropriate. And I know these are more of like a California style of palm tree, but, you know, this is my city. I could put down the trees that I want. So I like the palm trees. They're, you know, kind of newer to the game with the airports DLC. Those were, they're now vanilla base game assets. So that's awesome. We get really good trees now. And they even improved the older ones, which aren't really that bad anymore, but still I like to, I have a lot of modded trees. I think that having a variety in your trees really kind of makes your city look really good. So I like to have a lot of different kinds of trees. So yeah, just going around and doing a lot of that to make this area a little bit more green. It also kind of hides some of these open spaces that are just kind of too awkward to put a building in some of these spots. They're just really like this corner, for example, like what are you going to put there? There's really not much that you could do with that after you have like all these row houses. And also I like to use these bushes as sort of like a type of hedge fence between properties, so you can see where the different property lines between the buildings. And where they really come in handy is areas like this, where you're trying to create sort of a barrier between a neighborhood and some type of infrastructure like a road or train tracks. Having those just a bunch of trees really kind of hides that gap in between. And it's sort of, if you were living in one of those apartments or something, for example, you wouldn't want to, I think it would be a lot nicer and you would feel a lot more secluded and kind of peaceful looking out and seeing some trees rather than just seeing this big concrete pillar or some cars on a road or whatever. So I know whenever I take the train into the city for work, I always kind of take a second to kind of see what it looks like from my point of view in the train. And a lot of times my view is blocked by a lot of trees, which is interesting because especially when you're going into the downtown, there's still a lot of areas that are somewhat dense that still just use trees as a barrier between the train tracks and the other side of the tracks, like the roads and the apartments and everything. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. But here I really actually enjoyed kind of getting into this build because I didn't really know what to expect, and I'm really happy with the way things turned out. For example, these little back alleyways. So this is a trick that I've seen a lot of times on $2.20 videos, and he likes these pathways that you can actually look and find it. You can look up propolis, and you'll find these pathways that don't have any props on them. So it's like every kind of pathway, the university pathways, the parks ones, they all have propless versions without the trash cans and the lamps and trees or whatever. And they make really, really good like back alleyways like this because they don't have intersections with the roads, and they're also only like 1 unit wide, so they fit really, really nicely into these tighter spaces. And yeah, not to mention they don't stand out too much. Like they blend in really well with the other infrastructure and everything. And so I like to put that kind of in the back behind some of these buildings that you don't really see. But these are the areas that I kind of like to focus on. I think I've talked before about just the infrastructure behind cities, and I always kind of find that fascinating. Like what you see is really easy to look at the buildings and the roads and the things that are like really obvious in a city that you see all the time, but a lot of times you don't pay attention to actually what's kind of going on behind the scenes, so to speak. So I'd like to put down some of these parking lots and some of these kind of back alleyways that are a little bit you don't pay much attention to, but like they're there, and a lot of times especially in city skylines, focusing on these areas can really kind of give the city a little bit more detail, even though it's not, I've only plopping down a couple of parking lots and a couple of pathways, but it's like otherwise these areas would have been neglected. And these are oftentimes too, like you might have saw me just a second ago, and now too, putting down this basketball court, and then this area like under the train tracks, for example, over there you can see on the top right there where I had that fence and those crates and some trash. Those areas exist a lot, even in nicer areas. Like this, is a relatively decent looking residential area. I'd imagine it's not super cheap to live here because it's pretty close to the downtown, and some of these buildings might be a little bit more rundown, but some of these are pretty nice. But with that being said, though, there's no development going on under the train tracks, so there's really no other use for this space other than parking and just kind of like empty space. But this empty space still has usually something in it, and I'm trying to kind of capture that by putting some bushes, putting some trash, just those areas that are not developed. And you don't want to be too neglectful of those places because, well, they're, like I said, they're there and they exist, and there's might be some kind of use for them. I know that a lot of times in Chicago now they put up a lot of parking spots under kind of like train tracks and stuff like this, and the either the buildings will rent them out if they're, residential buildings, or, things like Spot Hero and everything will rent them out for people who are visiting to come and rent the parking space for, the hour or the day or whatever. So, it's turning these spaces that are typically just neglected and just quote unquote wastes of space. We're actually turning those spaces into, something that could generate revenue and, make somebody some money, or, have another purpose other than just kind of sitting there and being ugly and useless. So yeah, I think that's kind of cool in this build that we're able to do that with some of these areas under the tracks. And now these are things that I like to put down a lot too, are these little bollards that kind of keep the, the separation between areas that are accessible by car and areas that are not. So making sure that, people from the main road there couldn't get onto the alleyway, and that ideally wouldn't cause any traffic problems because, it wouldn't create like another intersection there. And yeah, here's another, just kind of finishing up this last corner here. Again, just really simple, just putting down trees, putting down parking lots, and, trying to just kind of fill the empty space, but, without making everything too cluttered. But yeah, you'll find, if you look around in, your own city where you live, or if you live near a city, you'll find some of these areas like this, like kind of pay attention to these areas like this. It's really cool when you really look at what is going on in terms of the development, and kind of some of the things that you don't always notice the first time when you're walking around. And now moving on, this is something that I really like to try to implement in my cities a little bit more lately, and especially this one, I say that I like to have a little bit of European influence kind of in the back of my mind. And this reminds me of my time in Sevilla. So, as if I didn't mention this already, I think I did in a really early video. But if you're new to the channel, fun fact, I did study abroad in Sevilla, Spain, and there was something. It was really funny. One of the first things that they told me when I got there was stay off the bike paths, which was, kind of funny because in America, especially like I said, I'm from Chicago, and there's not really a ton of bike infrastructure in Chicago, at least not in the areas that I'm walking around. But in Sevilla, there, like next to every main road, there was a dedicated bike path, and they would get really mad if you walked in the bike lane. And they were like this, they were like these green, clearly marked bike pathways. And yeah, it was just really funny because a lot of times, this is something we don't see in the States. By my house in this, out in the suburbs, we have bike trails. They kind of go through the forest, and like nice scenic routes that you could take, but nothing really in the city that you can't like really get to places on bikes. But over there, yeah, they were everywhere. Every main road there was a bike path next to every single main road, and typically separated by some trees, just like I kind of did there. And so yeah, it's just I just thought it was funny. They're like, you gotta stay off the bike path. When you're walking, like don't stay in the bike lane because they'll hit you, and they'll yell at you and be like, get out of the way. Just something they don't have in the States. But yeah, so this part too, I kind of didn't really know what to do with this space. It was kind of weird since I couldn't make connection, to the highway, or not to the highway, to the road. Like, there was no spot to put another building. So what I ended up doing was kind of making a little private, kind of like a private yard for this apartment complex, putting down a pool, and just kind of like some open space. Even though this is like a more dense area of the city, this is obviously it's a modern building, so I envision that this is a newer apartment complex, kind of reclaim some of this land. And that one of the luxuries of living here is that you get to enjoy this more open outdoor space, in this little private space kind of next to the whole city. All right, and that is a wrap on this area. Detailing it up and everything took a little bit longer than I expected, but we'll get to this area in the next episode. We'll save it for the next one. But yeah, this actually makes this part of the city look so much better. I mean, it was so weird having just that huge gap, right here. And I like the way that all the buildings really fit in the tracks. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So thanks for sticking around to the end. And stay tuned for the next episode where we'll detail up probably some more of this downtown and, you know, keep expanding our city and growing the population. And hopefully pretty soon we'll hit the next milestone, since we still are playing with milestones on. But in the meantime, have a great rest of your week, and I will catch you guys in the next video. See ya!